It seems many Christians are still pushing unfounded lies about the final words of the founder of the Church of Satan. In this episode of Satansplain, we'll be examining and debunking the Anton LaVey deathbed recant hoax. Also answering listener mail about Satanists in the military and the notion of an afterlife.
Well, it's not Satan worship, it's Satanism. It's embracing the life-enriching things which have traditionally been given the devil's name. Pride, lust, earthly success, rational self-interest, atheism, humor, nonconformity, science, a passion for living, being selective about whom we love. We don't see these as shameful sins, but empowering ideals. And we also recognize the psychological power and fun of symbolism and aesthetics, so we utilize Satan as mythology's most fitting mascot for what we're about.
Satansplain, Satanic Talk with Church of Satan Magister Bill M.
Magister Bill M. here with Satansplain. I've had a few different people in the last month or so ask me about the alleged deathbed conversion of Anton LaVey. Apparently, this hoax was making its rounds on the internet again. I talked about this briefly way back in episode 30 or 31 when I was talking about logical fallacies, but I guess it's worth addressing again. So let's get right into that now in the first half of this episode, and then stick around in the second half for some listener mail. All right, let's start with the facts. Anton LaVey, founder of the Church of Satan, died in October of 1997, and 11 years after that, some Christian on YouTube uploaded a clip, and in that clip, there's a Christian minister named Patricia King who says, quote, "I heard that, and I won't mention his name, but it was a big leader and founder of a huge satanic organization, and he was on his deathbed. For a Satanist at the time of death, it's a great victory for them because death is a huge thing that they celebrate. And he was getting ready to die and pass on his powers, and on his deathbed he must have got some revelation or angelic appearance or something. And he went into shock, and he said, oh my, what have I done? He said, there's something very wrong, there's something very wrong, there's something very wrong." Unquote. Now, fast forward to 2025. There are still moronic lying Christians on the internet who copy this story, or a slight variation of it, and claim that Anton LaVey converted to Christianity on his deathbed. Okay, where to begin debunking this enormous, steaming truckload of bullshit? Well, notice this for starters. The only evidence we have of this story is an anecdote, and this single anecdote comes from a Christian minister. Like, we've never heard that kind of person make up lies about Satanists before. In fact, we see a lie right in this anecdote itself. She says that Satanists celebrate death, and in a huge way. Now, this woman has obviously never read the Satanic Bible. The book says life is the great indulgence, death the great abstinence, and there are entire chapters in the book written in non-poetic, straightforward English about the satanic value placed on life and survival. What is the most important holiday in Satanism? It's your birthday, so she could not have been more wrong if she tried. In fact, I've been celebrating my own birthday, which is why you've had to wait for this episode. But thank you for waiting, and let's go on. This woman never knew Anton LaVey. She was not there when he died. In fact, we don't even know if this story of hers is about Anton LaVey. We're never given a name. We're told it was the leader of some satanic organization, but given just how many pseudo-satanic organizations there are, combined with the fact that Christians will label anything they don't like as satanic, well, who the hell knows if this was even a reference to Anton LaVey and the Church of Satan. Now, on top of all that, it's an anecdote that came out years after the time it supposedly took place. So we're supposed to believe in not only all of the above that I've been mentioning, but that this Christian who allegedly knew about Anton LaVey's last words didn't think of mentioning it at all until years later, And this YouTube clip, was uploaded 11 years later after he died. And, nobody before that seemingly knew or reported on it. But it gets even more ridiculous than that when you consider the following. Anton LaVey died with pulmonary edema. That is a medical condition where you have fluid in your lungs and you are physically unable to speak. Anton LaVey collapsed at home, unconscious. He was rushed to the hospital and he died there. So, to recap, how do we know that this story of Anton LaVey recanting on his deathbed is a hoax? Well, the burden of proof is on the people claiming the story is true, and they don't have the proof, so that would be enough to reject its validity, I'd say. But, besides no evidence for it, there seems to be all evidence against it. Anton LaVey was medically unable to speak. The anecdote came out only years later. The anecdote in its original form doesn't even say it was necessarily Anton LaVey. The anecdote even contains an embarrassing lie about Satanism itself and what we celebrate. And in fact, the source is from a person with a vested interest in lying about Satanists. So I think I've made my point. It's an embarrassingly bogus story, no matter how you slice it. I think it's worth saying that this is the first time we've seen Christians lie by trying to spread a false rumor that somebody whom they see to be a threat to their Christianity supposedly converted to Christianity or recanted their work on their deathbed. In fact, here's another example. Charles Darwin, the scientist known for the theory of evolution through natural selection. For over 200 years now, there have been Christians who've been claiming that Charles Darwin recanted evolution on his deathbed. So he was in bed, he was dying, and sometime in his final hours alive, he supposedly said that all of his lifetime work in evolutionary biology was a lie, and, that evolution wasn't true at all. Now, is there any evidence that he did this? The answer, as I'm sure you may have guessed, is no. He died with his family surrounding him, and when the rumors later went around that he had recanted evolution before he died, Charles Darwin's sister spoke up and said no, nothing of the sort happened. She was there with him, and she didn't hear anything like that. Now, some Christians try to get crafty on that, and they say, oh, so are you saying you don't take the Bible on faith, but you take the word of Charles Darwin's sister on faith? No, I don't need faith to reject a claim that doesn't have any evidence. There is no evidence that Charles Darwin denied evolution on his deathbed, and we never heard the claim until years after he died, and the claim didn't come from anybody who was actually there. Therefore, it's indistinguishable from something somebody made up. Anybody can claim that anybody else said something just before they died, and nobody can easily disprove that, which again is why the burden of proof is on the person claiming the deathbed story to be true. But besides all of the dishonesty in trying to spread rumors like that, there's something more important to realize here, and that is this. Sticking with the Darwin example here, even if we did assume that Charles Darwin denied evolution just before he died, so what? It doesn't make any of the scientific evidence disappear. It's not like Darwin said, evolution is false, and then croaked, and then suddenly all the fossils and the DNA evidence magically disappeared. Truth in science is not determined by authority. It's determined by what withstands the scrutiny of the scientific method. We have abundant evidence for evolution. Maybe I'll do a Satansplain episode on that. I don't know. And not even Darwin himself could have wished that away. I mean, it's like thinking the equation E equals MC squared no longer works because you heard Albert Einstein said it was wrong just before he died. Yeah, science doesn't work like that. And likewise, even if we went along with this silly claim that Anton LaVey recanted on his deathbed, what is it that they think this proves? It's not like the pages of the Satanic Bible suddenly disappeared. The validity of Satanism is not dependent upon details of Anton LaVey's biography. I'm going to repeat that sentence. The validity of Satanism is not dependent upon the details of Anton LaVey's biography. I repeat that because I'd like you to keep that in mind whenever you hear not only the incredibly ridiculous story about Anton LaVey's alleged deathbed recant story, but any other claims against LaVey, like, oh, I heard Anton LaVey didn't really play on the George's Montalba album, or, oh, I heard Anton LaVey wasn't really a police photographer. First of all, you'll find that most of these types of accusations came out right after LaVey died. They were put on the internet, I think, like some months after he died, and people have been copying that since. And they also seem to just be based on somebody else's say-so, namely somebody who has an axe to grind with the Church of Satan. But secondly, and even more importantly, we Satanists are Satanists because we resonate with Satanism, the religion Anton LaVey codified. The details about LaVey's personal life and hobbies, they're fun and all. They're fascinating to read about, but they're not the reason I came to identify myself as a Satanist, and it's probably the same for other Satanists as well, I would think. But getting back to this final last words hoax, why do Christians do this? Why do they tell lies like this in the first place? To try to answer that question, I think it's worth noting that the story has all the hallmarks of an urban myth. An urban myth, or urban legend, is, one of those modern folklore stories that people like to tell, but a story that typically has no basis in reality. There's the urban myth about the guy with a hook for his hand who killed some teenagers making out in a parked car and strung up the body so the blood from one of the corpses was dripping on the roof of the car. There's the urban myth about the lady who dried off her wet poodle in the microwave, or the midget who supposedly hung himself on the set of The Wizard of Oz, and you can see it in some scene. Or the urban legend about the ring of criminals supposedly drugging people and stealing their kidneys and putting the person in a tub of ice and all that. Now, there's no evidence for these stories. That doesn't necessarily mean that one person sat down and decided to write them up and tell them as if they were true. No, urban myths may have basis sometimes in one real news story that gets exaggerated, and then that story gets told through the grapevine of more and more people, and the details end up changing each time. Sometimes people will say, no, I know the story is true because I heard it from my sister, who heard it from her friend, who heard it from their friends, who said it happened to one of their friends. That's not really convincing. But notice with these urban myths, they can never seem to get any exact names or dates or places. It's always really vague. But getting back to one thing I said earlier, I think what mostly drives people to repeat these urban myths is because the storyteller wants them to be true, at least in some way. There's, again, another urban myth is the urban myth about how after the American astronauts spent all of this money and research to make a pen that would write in outer space, the Russian cosmonauts solved the problem by just using a pencil. That's another bogus story, though. There is no evidence for that, just like with the others. In this pencil example, the reason why astronauts don't use pencils, as I've read, is not because they weren't crafty and practical enough to think of the idea, but because rubbing a piece of paper with a pencil tip causes graphite to come off the pencil to make the line, but in zero gravity, that graphite can float in the air and can get accidentally inhaled or make its way through the vents and mess up machinery. So that's why the Fisher space pen was invented. But of course, the people who repeat the urban myth don't know anything about that. They just like the story. They like this idea that the big, bloated U.S. bureaucratic government spent all this time and money to engineer something. And the oh-so-humble foreigners who were not overeducated, but somehow smarter and craftier, wittier, they used their practical know-how to come up with a brilliantly simple solution. And people want to believe a story like that because they think it makes a good story. They like the ending. They feel clever also when they tell their friends the story. So that's why they tell urban myths like that, even though, again, it's fictional. And we see people who do this on social media all the time with not just urban myths, but clickbait headlines from the news. They'll see a news article with a headline claiming that some politician they dislike said or did something stupid or malicious, or that a report has come out claiming that 70% of people do this thing or another. And people read these headlines and they want them to be true so badly that they don't even bother reading beyond the headline or checking with another news source to see whether or not the story is true. They just share it to other people online who do the same. They even do this with things they don't want to be true, but they'll do it if it confirms their bias. That's what I mean by wanting it to be true on some level. You know, they'll see something and say, oh my God, can you believe this politician is threatening to do this thing to these people? I can't believe it. I hate that politician so much. And again, it may turn out that this nightmare isn't true at all, but the reader already hated the politician in question and already hated them to begin with, so it doesn't matter whether the story is true or not. The default is to believe the bad story about the bad person you think is already bad. So, in conclusion, the reason why Christians like to propagate this lie that Anton LaVey converted to Christianity in his last words, or stories where he did something similar to that, I think is because they desperately want to believe it's true, so that it gives them some false feeling of victory, again, without having to bother to research it. They don't care to see first if what they're repeating is a lie. It just feels too good for them to share the bogus story as if it were true. Kind of like Christianity itself, but I digress. Let's take a commercial break. You are listening to Satansplain.
You are listening to Satansplain, real satanic talk with Church of Satan Magister Bill M. For questions, comments, and correspondence, send an email to bill@satansplain.com.
Do satanic cults lurk in the shadows? Can memories of satanic ritual abuse be repressed? Do exorcisms really drive out demons? And are those demons always possessing Zach Baggins? I'm JD Sword, the Satanic Skeptic. Join me on The Devil in the Details as I examine these questions and more, bringing a skeptical and satanic perspective to the paranormal. The Devil in the Details, available on Apple Podcast, Google Podcast, Spotify, and more.
In 1966, Anton LaVey created the Church of Satan, marking the beginning of the Age of Fire and Year 1 Anno Satanas. In 1969, he published the Satanic Bible, codifying Satanism as a religion, the first time it's been done in human history.
In the name of Satan, ruler of the earth, king of hell, come forth from the pit, bestow the blessings of hell upon us. For we are your children, and we invoke thee this night.
In 2001, I was appointed High Priest of the Church of Satan. In 2007, I published the Satanic Scriptures, further defining and expanding on satanic philosophy and greater magic ritual.
Hail, Satan full of might! Hail, Satan full of might! Our allegiance is with thee! Our allegiance is with thee! Cursed are they! Cursed are they! The God adorers! The God adorers! And cursed are the worshippers! And cursed are the worshippers! Of the Nazarene eunuch! Of the Nazarene eunuch!
For the past 50 years, the Church of Satan has stood as the sole organization to define and defend Satanism as a religion. And though pretenders to the infernal throne have come and gone, we have stood the test of time and will into the future. Visit churchofsatan.com for more information and read the Satanic Bible and the Satanic Scriptures. Knowledge is the solution for ignorance. Hail Satan!
Hail Satan! Hail Satan!
Magister Bill M. here with Satansplain. Visit the main website for the show at satansplain.com. There you can find every Satansplain episode. You can also listen to Satansplain on Spotify, YouTube, Audible, and a host of other places. If you're on social media, please give Satansplain a like and a follow, or whatever the equivalent is on Facebook, X, and YouTube. Likewise, if you're listening now on YouTube, don't forget to hit that like button for this episode. For all questions and correspondence, please email me directly. The address is bill@satansplain.com. If you enjoy Satansplain and would like to support the show, please go to the show's page on Locals. Open your web browsers and go to satansplain.locals.com. You can sign up for Locals for free, but you can also additionally become a paid subscriber there. And that is the best way you can support the show. Though we also have a merch store. You can go to store.satansplain.com for that. And thank you, as always, to all of you who support the show in one way or another. Let's get to some listener mail. Ryan has sent us a satanic anecdote. Well, you know what that means. It's time for this episode's satanic anecdote, or as we call them for short, Satanecdote. Cue the Satanecdote theme song.
Satanic anecdotes. Satanecdotes.
Ryan says that he and his partner were getting some body piercings done, and they were chatting with the body piercing artist. Ryan says that one of the things they had in common with him is that they were all parents. So they talked about their kids, how old they are, and so on. They mentioned to the artist how that particular day, Grandma was currently watching the kids. And they had to lie to Grandma as to what they were doing that day that they needed a babysitter for. And the piercing artist laughed and asked, "Oh, I guess Grandma wouldn't approve of this, huh?" And all three of them got a good chuckle out of that. Ryan replied, "Oh, no, she's the type that wanted our 5-year-old to put a Bible under her pillow so that her nightmares would go away." And Ryan says, "We laughed again, and I continued by saying, I could have done that. I could have put a Bible under her pillow, but I don't think it would work. And also, Grandma wouldn't like the Bible I have because mine says satanic on it." And so the piercing artist smiled at that and said, "Yeah, well, at least the Satanic Bible says you are your own God, and you don't have to take shit from anyone if you don't want to." And Ryan says, "I was a little surprised and asked him if he was a member of the Church of Satan or just read the book. He replied he wasn't a member, he just read the book, and he liked a fair amount of it, but wouldn't go so far to say he was a Satanist." And Ryan adds that, quote, "The rest of the session was very pleasant, but it was a welcome surprise to run into someone that not only admitted that they read the Satanic Bible, but that they understood it, even if it wasn't their thing." So thank you, Ryan, for that Satanecdote. And yes, I have met people myself like this in my travels. People who've read the Satanic Bible. They have an idea of what it's about, even if they came to the conclusion that it ultimately wasn't for them. And as Satanists, we say that's fine. This isn't a religion where we're trying to convert people. I mean, if you don't agree with Satanism enough to call yourself a Satanist, then why would I try to convince you otherwise? It's not like there's a supernatural boogeyman who's out to get you if you don't convert to the same religion as me. I don't really gain anything by converting you. We say Satanism demands study, not worship, and to me that means you don't become a Satanist through submission or forced devotion. Either you read it and it resonates with you, or it doesn't. And as for the people who read our stuff and dig it, maybe even get something out of it that they feel applies to their lives in some way, without taking on the actual identity of Satanist, well, that's fine too. I've got a question here from Achilles. This question kind of ties in with the topic of the good guy badge, which was something I was originally planning on doing in this episode, but I think I'll do it in the next episode. Achilles says, recently I've been reflecting on LaVey's views on patriotism and self-sacrifice, and I'd love to hear your thoughts. And then he quotes a bit here from the Satanic Bible, the part that says, history shows that men who have given their own lives in pursuit of an ideal have been deified for their martyrdom. Religionists and political leaders have been very crafty in laying their plans. By holding the martyr up as a shining example to his fellow man, they eliminate the common sense reaction that willful self-destruction goes against all animal logic. To the Satanist, martyrdom and non-personalized heroism is to be associated not with integrity, but with stupidity. This, of course, does not apply to the situations which involve the safety of a loved one, but to give one's own life for something as impersonal as a political or religious issue is the ultimate in masochism. So, as Achilles sums it up, he says, okay, LaVey argues that 1. Leaders rarely risk their own lives, but use patriotism to manipulate the masses. 2. Historically, powerful figures send ordinary people to war for their own interests. And 3. Soldiers often believe they fight for freedom, but in reality, they may be serving the agenda of those in power. However, he adds at 3 points he sees that are, on the other end, that some wars are necessary for survival and freedom. If no one had ever sacrificed themselves, we wouldn't have many of the freedoms we enjoy today. And another observation is that Achilles, who is from Greece, I suppose I should have gathered that from the name, says that if Greece had followed this mindset in 1821 or 1940, Greece would not exist today. Now, Achilles asks about what seems to be a dilemma here. He says that regarding the question of, is it worth dying for one's country? If your homeland is truly under threat, self-defense makes sense. On the other hand, if you're being used for political or foreign interest, then no, it's not worth it. So I think Achilles answered his own questions here, but I replied back and said that this question may be a better one to ask the Infernal Legion podcast. And that's a podcast on radiofreesatan.com run by Church of Satan members, and it's all about Satanists in the military. I also pointed out that there is another line from the Satanic Bible that comes to mind, and it's this: each person must decide for himself what his obligations are to his respective friends, family, and community. So I said that ultimately I don't think this is any more of a dilemma, a satanic moral dilemma, than other topics we could ask about in a satanic context. We do have Church of Satan members who have served or are still serving in the military. Presumably, they made that career decision in part because of what they feel their duties are to their community expanded to their country. But again, I'm sure the folks over at the Infernal Legion podcast could give a better firsthand answer. Speaking of podcasts by Satanists, Church of Satan Reverend Jeff Ivins has been doing a new show outside of Radio Free Satan called The Naked Satanist. I myself was just listening to episode number 3 of that earlier today on the show's website, nakedsatanist.com. Check that out if you have a chance. Don't worry, there's not pictures or anything of people, It's a satanic podcast. Naked with the truth, I guess you could say. Next is an email from Lanny. Lanny writes, "Hello, Magister. I can't remember where this came from, but I seem to recall Blanche Barton stating in an interview that she doesn't discount the possibility of reincarnation. This posed a question to me that I'd like to hear your thoughts on, and the question is this: if one believes in the possibility of an afterlife, does that necessarily constitute a break from the tenets of Satanism? Personally, I believe that some sort of afterlife isn't unfeasible. For example, I don't completely discount the notion of some sort of cosmic consciousness that we all might return to in some way after our physical deaths. Having said that, I don't stand 100% behind that idea, because ultimately there is no solid proof. Therefore, for all intents and purposes, I choose to live my life as though it's the only existence I'll ever know. That certainly seems like a satanic point of view to me, but I wonder if you have some insight to share. Well, I wrote back to Lanny and I said that no, I think it is technically possible to entertain or even believe in the existence of an afterlife and still not necessarily be in conflict with, say, the 9 statements or 11 rules or committing any of the 9 satanic sins. But, and this is a big but, I would argue that it strongly depends on the specific belief. If your afterlife belief is something like, I have to appease this particular invisible deity and appease to him in order to avoid supernatural punishment beyond the grave, well, I would argue that that is not compatible with Satanism. Still, as I've said before, Satanists by their nature are often into strange and esoteric things, so I don't see what's wrong with a Satanist, for example, thinking, well, I've read these books and I saw this documentary about reincarnation or about ghosts or seances or energy imprints in the 4th dimension or whatever. And I found it rather interesting. Who knows? There's a lot of stuff that's unexplained. Maybe this thing is possible. The reason I don't see an inherent conflict with that in Satanism is that you're just taking an interest in this mysterious topic. Maybe it entertains you. Maybe it gives you a sense of wonder. That's fine. Notice, however, that there's a huge difference between entertaining a possibility or enjoying something for the weird novelty of it all versus letting that be some kind of dogma on how you live your life. As I've said several times before, this is a point that seems lost on your typical militant atheist you might find on a place like Reddit. Right now, as I record this, I have a coffee mug with my zodiac sign on it right next to me. Why do I have this? Well, because it was a gift. I like the mug, and I like the novelty of it. My zodiac sign is an amusing legend about me because of what time in the calendar year I was born. I still don't believe in astrology, and my sense of skepticism and well-being is not threatened by a coffee mug design. Now, getting back to the more specifics about an afterlife, we do say in the Satanic Bible, life is the great indulgence, death the great abstinence. So, even if there is such a thing as an afterlife, it's not something a Satanist would strive for. We also talk about the Satanist's immortal spirit, metaphorically living on in, to quote the Satanic Bible, not an intangible paradise, but in the brains and sinews of those whose respect you have gained. So one could argue that there is an afterlife in the purely symbolic sense of living on in your impact on others, what you leave behind, your accomplishments, and so on. As I said also to Lanny in my reply back to him, personally, I think belief in a literal afterlife is most often rooted in wishful thinking. The Satanic Bible goes into some detail about this, whether it's, for example, the self-righteous people who are convinced that they've been selected for heaven, or the person who isn't really interesting at all, kind of a boring guy, but wants to believe he was a king or a famous person in a previous life. Or somebody who comforts himself in thinking that other people will get punished in the afterlife if they do something bad. A wishful thought that justice is guaranteed to prevail. Well, Satanic Statement number 2 explicitly condemns spiritual pipe dreams. And I would include those sorts of things among them. But once again, mere curiosity about the notion of an afterlife, reading stories and anecdotes from other people, that's not necessarily a spiritual pipe dream. Could just be a hobby, a passing interest. And I myself have had some strange experiences that I couldn't explain, but that's ultimately all they were, strange experiences I couldn't explain. One Halloween night, I was staying at the Lizzie Borden house, and I got to take part in a seance. I did not believe in ghosts. I still don't believe in ghosts, but there were certainly some strange things going on with the table moving in ways I don't have an immediate explanation for. It was rolling around on its bottom edge, tipping from one person at the table to the next. Our hands were lightly on the table, but not enough to push it down. So I don't know. I don't know what was going on. Was it a ghost? I doubt it. Was it due to some transfer of psychic energy in the air or something like that? Some other alternative metaphysical explanation? I doubt it, but I don't know. Was it a psychological phenomenon like the ideomotor effect where, we were pushing the table without realizing it? I don't know, that seems like a more plausible explanation, but I still don't know. Was it secretly some kind of trick table and somebody was hiding in the basement below us, moving the bottom with a broomstick? I don't know, but I certainly don't rule that out either. In any case, it didn't change how I live my life or look at the world, and it gave me a fun Halloween night. So I just leave it at that. Personally, I still don't believe in an afterlife because to me, the idea just doesn't make any sense, first and foremost. I'm supposed to believe that when a person dies, the consciousness doesn't end there, but leaves the body and continues to operate without a body somehow, somewhere in the ether or whatever. Well, to paraphrase an answer I heard some years ago from Sam Harris, we know that different parts of the brain control different mental faculties. You damage this lobe and it affects speech. You damage this other lobe, it affects sight. You damage this lobe, it affects memory. And yet we're supposed to believe that when you damage all of it, that the person becomes a ghost or spirit that can speak again, see again, and remember everything again. Nah, I don't buy it. Now, I think asking, where do we go when we die it's like asking, where does a stain go after it's been cleaned? When you clean a stain from a rug, there's no more stain. It doesn't go from one place to another. The stain was a collection of materials that dried up on the rug, and when you put a stain cleaner on it and you wiped it, those particles combined chemically with the cleaner and came off in some kind of soap scum, which you wiped up with the towel and then threw away. That's it. Your conscience is not this binary thing that's either there or not there. It's what we call the overall effect of all these different neurons and parts of your brain interacting and responding with things. You lose one brain cell and you still have consciousness. Death, however, is the end of consciousness. Life is the great indulgence, death, the great abstinence again. That's my take. Again, I see no shame in enjoying stories about reincarnation or ghosts or whatever. Maybe pondering, oh, gee, what if? Okay, enjoy those kind of stories if you like, but I don't see it as being a novelty any more significant than my Zodiac coffee mug. In the meantime, I think ending this episode of Satansplain and seeing you in the next episode is about as close to reincarnation as we'll ever get. So thank you for listening. We'll see you next time. Hail Satan.
You have been listening to Satansplain. For more information about the show, visit the official website at Satansplain.com. And for more information about Satanism itself, visit churchofsatan.com. This episode, copyright 2025, Magister Bill M.